The wind screamed against the glass, rattling every window in Sheriff Lucas Reed's cabin. It was the kind of night that turned the mountain into a wilderness of black shapes and whistling ghosts. Lucas sat at his small kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee untouched, his eyes fixed on the frost-rimmed photo of his late wife pinned to the fridge. He could hear the blizzard's wild breath and, beneath it, the ache of old grief gnawing quietly. Somewhere in the walls, the clock ticked, but time had lost its shape. It was just another empty night, until something broke the silence. A frantic, clawing scratch, raw, desperate, shuddered from the front porch, followed by a thump heavy enough to rattle the door on its hinges. Lucas's hand went to his service weapon, instincts on high alert, but when he flung the door open, what stared back at him wasn't danger, but a battered soul fighting for its life. A German shepherd, huge, rain-soaked, one paw dragging, its thick coat matted with mud and blood, collapsed at Lucas's boots. The animal's eyes, haunted, intelligent, locked onto his, full of something pleading and wild. For a split second, Lucas just stood there, heart pounding. Then he knelt, arms sliding under the dog's trembling frame, and carried him inside into the warmth and light. It was only as he laid the shepherd on a blanket that Lucas saw the battered leather pouch around the animal's neck. Inside, he found a scratched K9 badge, a government ID for James Merritt, and smeared with mud, a USB drive that looked like it had been through hell. The shepherd's name was stamped into the badge, Thor. "Easy, boy," Lucas murmured, voice catching as he gently inspected the wounds. "Who sent you out here?" The dog's only answer was a weak flick of the tail. But Lucas could feel it, a purpose burning through the animal's battered body, a message driven by something bigger than instinct or fear. There was a story here, maybe even an answer to the case that had haunted Lucas for years. The disappearance of James Merritt, the K9 officer who'd vanished on the job, branded a traitor by men in suits who'd never looked into his eyes. Thor was no ordinary stray. He was a living witness, a messenger sent through the storm. Lucas's hands shook as he plugged the USB into his encrypted laptop. The drive's contents were locked behind military-grade security, but one screen flashed. A single phrase, coded coordinates, and the word, Night Vault. It was enough to send a chill down Lucas's spine, a familiar shiver of fear and hope tangled together. He called Sarah Lynn, the only person he trusted with ghosts like these. Sarah, a private cyber investigator with a haunted edge, picked up after the second ring. Years ago, her brother died, tangled in the same web that had taken Merritt down. Lucas barely had to explain before she was scanning the drive, her voice tense with the weight of old wounds. "Someone's monitoring all the town's data. This isn't over," she warned, her tone sharp. "And that dog, he's not just a clue, Lucas. He's the target." Lucas turned back to Thor, who tried to stand despite his wounds, eyes locked on the door, as if guarding Lucas from something only he could sense. Lucas noticed, outside the window, unfamiliar boot prints deep in the snow, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. There was something else, a thin, almost invisible fiber optic cable running behind his cabin, half buried beneath ice. He bent closer, heart hammering. This was no accident. He was being watched. His phone vibrated. A message blinked on the cracked screen. "Stop digging, or he disappears again." No signature, no number, just the threat hanging between the lines. Thor, as if understanding the warning, pressed himself to the door, hackles up. Lucas locked every window and loaded his rifle. The storm outside raged, but inside, two survivors settled in for a night of waiting, both knowing that danger wasn't the storm, it was the men hunting through it. As the wind howled and the power flickered, Lucas sat at Thor's side, his mind racing with questions. Why had Thor risked his life to get here? What secrets did that battered pouch hold? And who would kill to make sure the truth never came out? Somewhere deep in the night, Thor nudged Lucas's hand with his nose, a silent promise that neither of them was alone in the storm anymore. The first thread of hope, frail but unbroken, had arrived on his doorstep, battered and silent, but determined to be heard. The morning after the storm, Lucas Reed woke to the silence that only comes after a blizzard. The sun was a pale disk behind a veil of snow, and the world beyond his windows looked almost peaceful, except for the faint, unfamiliar boot prints leading away from his porch. Every muscle in his body was tight, his mind restless with unfinished questions and the grim certainty that the danger hadn't passed with the night. Thor lay stretched near the hearth, his breathing steady but shallow. Lucas moved quietly, setting out bowls of water and scraps of steak, anything to coax strength back into the battered dog. As Thor ate, Lucas crouched by his side, inspecting the leather pouch again. The badge, the ID, the USB, they felt heavier with daylight, as if the weight of secrets inside them was growing. Lucas booted up his encrypted laptop once more, inserting the mud-stained USB. The login demanded not just a password, but a string of military-grade security measures, fingerprint, voice pattern, a unique sequence of keystrokes. Lucas tried everything, even digging out old case files for clues, but the drive remained locked behind a wall of code. The only thing he could access was a string of coordinates pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat and a single word: Night Vault. His hands trembled as he dialed Sarah Lynn again. She answered with the calm focus of someone who lived in the shadows. Lucas explained the night's events, his voice low, clipped. Sarah listened in silence, then started running her own digital checks. In the background, Lucas could hear the static hum of her security systems. Sarah was no stranger to trouble. Her brother's death had made her paranoid, careful, and relentless. "Someone's breached the town's mainframe," she said after a few minutes. "I'm seeing a new tap on our emergency frequencies. Military signals, maybe. Lucas, whatever you found, you're not the only one looking." A chill crept through Lucas. He glanced at Thor, who was suddenly alert, ears pricked. Outside, the wind carried the soft crunch of snow. Someone was moving through the woods. Lucas checked his sidearm, then moved to the back door. He scanned the tree line, noticing for the first time the faint glint of something metallic, a hidden fiber optic line snaking behind his cabin, almost invisible beneath the drifts. He followed it a few feet, heart pounding, until he spotted a small, weatherproof box half buried under a rock. It was a surveillance relay, military issue. Lucas cursed under his breath, eyes narrowing. Someone had been watching him for days, maybe weeks. His phone buzzed, a text from an unlisted number. "Stop digging, or he disappears again." Lucas felt Thor's presence at his knee, the dog's body tense, hackles raised. There was no mistaking it. Whoever was after Thor had found them, and they wanted Lucas out of the way. The cold wasn't just in the air. It was inside him now, a shiver of fear and anger. He went back inside, locking the doors, every movement deliberate and quiet. Thor sat by the window, watching the world with a soldier's focus. The dog didn't sleep, didn't relax. Every time a shadow flickered past the window, Thor's ears twitched, his gaze sharp. Lucas found himself talking to the dog in a low voice, explaining things he'd never said out loud, to anyone. How Merritt had been his friend, how the case had cost him not just his reputation, but his marriage, how he'd never forgiven himself for giving up the search. Thor listened, silent and unblinking, as if understanding every word. Lucas sent Sarah photos of the surveillance device and the message. She called back in minutes, voice tense. "You're being watched in real time. Someone with access to military tech. This is no ordinary cover-up, Lucas. My firewall is getting hammered by remote logins, all routed through dummy accounts. And get this, your sheriff's office phone lines are bugged." "Don't trust anyone." Lucas gritted his teeth, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. He went to the window again, eyes sweeping the clearing. That's when he saw them. A second set of boot prints, smaller, lighter, circling the cabin, then vanishing toward the north ridge. Someone had been close, too close. He dug through his old files, tracking the details Sarah had flagged. The phrase, Night Vault, kept resurfacing, tied to old federal ops, Cold War secrets, and one name, Captain Trent Caldwell. The same Caldwell who'd led the task force that destroyed Merritt's career, and who'd since climbed the ranks to become nearly untouchable. Lucas's stomach twisted. This was bigger than he'd ever guessed. As dusk began to fall, Sarah called again, urgency in her voice. "They're not just watching, they're actively erasing files. I just saw your email archive vanish. I've started backup protocols, but you need to secure that USB and whatever else you find. I'll set up a secure drop." "Don't leave the house until I say." Lucas hung up, hands shaking. He copied the contents of the USB to an encrypted hard drive, then hid the original inside a hollow floorboard beneath his bed. He wrote a quick note to his son Ethan, now a state officer in another county, warning him not to come home, not yet. That night, Lucas sat with Thor by the fireplace, shotgun across his knees. The blizzard outside was nothing compared to the storm closing in around them. The lines between enemy and friend blurred with every passing hour. As darkness thickened, Thor stood up and pressed himself to the front door, eyes locked on the blackness beyond. Lucas realized for the first time that Thor wasn't just a lost K9, he was the last living witness to whatever had destroyed Merritt, and now, whatever was hunting Lucas. The stakes weren't just justice for an old friend, they were life and death, and the proof of a conspiracy that would stop at nothing to stay buried. A shadow flickered outside. Thor's growl vibrated low and deep. Lucas chambered around, heart racing, ready to defend the last sliver of truth left in this town. The night swallowed the cabin, and the war for the truth had truly begun. Dawn came slow and pale, painting the mountains in shades of cold blue and silver. The blizzard had left behind a world that seemed both silent and suspicious, every snowbank a hiding place for secrets, every shadow a threat waiting to move. Inside the cabin, Sheriff Lucas Reed sat in a heavy wooden chair, boots still muddy from the night's patrol. The only movement was the flicker of firelight and the steady rise and fall of Thor's chest as the dog finally slept, curled close enough for Lucas to feel his warmth. Lucas stared at the battered K9 badge and the federal ID on the table, their weight pressing on him like ghosts. It had been years since he'd felt anything close to hope in an investigation. Most days, he was just a survivor, drifting through the rituals of work and loneliness, haunted by the past and numb to the present. But now, something was shifting. It wasn't just the adrenaline of last night's threats. It was the sense that, maybe for the first time, he wasn't alone in his fight. He rose quietly, moving to the window. The sky was clear, but Lucas could see the evidence of last night's visitors, boot prints leading into the trees and the faint track of a vehicle at the far end of his property. The knowledge that he was being watched pressed in on him from every angle, but what gnawed at him most was the memory of Thor's eyes, how the dog never cowered, not even at the threat of violence, not even in the grip of fear. Lucas brewed coffee, setting a bowl of water near Thor, who cracked an eye open but didn't move. The dog was clearly trained, disciplined, alert, every sense wired for danger. Lucas studied him, marveling at the scars along the shepherd's side, the precision of his movements. He'd seen plenty of K9s in his day, but Thor was different. There was something old in his gaze, a survivor's wariness, a quiet grief that mirrored Lucas's own. He found himself talking aloud, more to himself than to the dog. "My wife used to say these mountains heal everything," he murmured, voice rough. "She died 3 winters back. Cancer. I spent months thinking I could save her, if I just did enough. But some things, you just can't fix. Not with a badge, not with a gun." Thor lifted his head, then shuffled closer, resting his massive head on Lucas's knee. The weight was grounding, real, heavy, but also strangely comforting. Lucas's hands trembled as he reached to scratch the dog behind the ears. For a moment, the world outside faded. There was just the crackle of fire, the gentle press of fur, and the feeling, impossible to deny, that both of them were carrying wounds no one else could see. The sense of kinship grew stronger as the morning stretched on. Lucas opened the old case files, spreading them out across the table. There were photos of James Merritt, smiling in uniform, reports stamped with words like traitor and disavowed. Lucas's jaw clenched. He'd never believed those stories, never trusted the men who tried to close the file and erase Merritt from memory. He spoke to Thor softly, his confession tumbling out in fragments. "I tried to find out what really happened. Every lead dried up. Caldwell's men shut every door, threatened my job, my family. I gave up, and I've hated myself for it ever since. But you made it out, didn't you? You saw something they didn't want anyone to know." Thor's only answer was a deep sigh, his eyes closing as if in agreement. Lucas copied the USB drive again, making sure there was always a backup hidden. He checked the locks, logged every strange sound outside, kept his gun close. At one point he caught a flash of movement, a car parked just out of sight, engine idling, then rolling away. He called Sarah, giving her an update. Her tone was steady, but Lucas could hear the tension in her words. "They're trying to flush you out. Stay inside. Keep that dog close." Lucas made a list of every suspicious movement, the unknown car, the footprints, the calls he didn't recognize. He started logging times, writing notes in a code he'd learned from Merritt himself, old habits from a life spent chasing ghosts. As he worked, he realized Thor was watching him, almost as if the dog knew what he was doing. "You're not just a stray," Lucas muttered. "You're a witness." That night, Lucas found himself poring over old photographs from the Merritt file. He lingered on one image, James kneeling beside Thor, both of them looking straight at the camera. There was pride and trust in that picture, something pure that felt almost impossible to find now. Lucas wondered what Thor had seen, what memories lived in that dog's mind, what horrors had followed him through the storm. As the fire burned low, Lucas lay on the floor next to Thor. He whispered the things he'd never told another soul. How guilt was heavier than any badge, how grief was a kind of storm that never passed. Thor listened in silence, then nudged Lucas's hand with his nose, a small, gentle reminder that even in the deepest isolation, healing sometimes arrived quietly, without a word. Outside, the wind howled, carrying secrets across the ice and snow. But inside the cabin, two survivors, one man, one dog, had found the first fragile thread of hope, woven through pain, trust, and the promise that neither would ever have to face the darkness alone again. Somewhere beneath the ice, a story waited to surface, and Lucas, for the first time in years, was ready to follow wherever it led. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the thick pines, laying long shadows across the crusted snow. Lucas felt a sense of disquiet settling over the cabin. The air was dense with secrets. Every branch outside looked like it was hiding something, every gust of wind a whisper from the past. Thor had barely moved all morning, his large frame curled by the hearth, but suddenly he snapped awake, ears pricked, eyes locked on the door. Lucas noticed the shift immediately. Thor's whole body tensed, tail stiff, hackles bristling. The dog's head darted toward the window, nose working, then back to the door as if he'd caught a scent the human nose would never detect. "What is it, boy?" Lucas whispered, following Thor's gaze out the frosted glass. The world beyond was eerily still, just the shimmer of ice and the long blue shadows of the forest. But Lucas knew better than to trust the quiet. Thor gave a low, urgent bark and pawed at the door. It wasn't the anxious scratch of a scared animal, but the confident signal of a partner with purpose. Lucas threw on his parka, grabbed his sidearm, and followed Thor outside, boots crunching into the deep snow. The cold bit at his cheeks, but Thor led with single-minded focus, winding through the trees, away from the road, deeper into the wilderness. Lucas's mind raced. Was it an ambush? Another message? Or was the dog following a memory only he could decipher? After nearly half a mile, Thor stopped at a small clearing, where the forest grew dense and the snow was undisturbed, except for a faint angular mound. Half buried in the drift was a weathered metal door, camouflaged by fallen branches and snow, its old government insignia barely visible beneath a decade of rust. Lucas's breath caught. He remembered the rumors, an old FBI outpost, shut down and abandoned after Merritt's disappearance. Lucas scanned the perimeter, tension humming in his veins before kneeling to brush the snow away. The lock was broken, frozen open, and a single set of footprints led inside, smaller than Lucas's, probably from the night before. He hesitated, then clicked on his flashlight and ducked inside. The air was thick with mildew and the sharp tang of old electronics. The narrow corridor led to a single room lit by the blinking green eye of a transmitter. Next to it was a pile of ransacked file boxes, paperwork scattered and stained by snowmelt. The room was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you doubt your own heartbeat. Thor moved ahead, pawing at the transmitter, his nose quivering with purpose. Lucas knelt beside the dog, studying the device. It was transmitting a real-time signal, coordinates, code words, status updates, direct to an unknown receiver. Lucas snapped photos and yanked the transmitter's plug. In the corner, he found a battered satchel half buried beneath fallen insulation. He unzipped it, his hands shaking. Inside were old black and white photos, some of Merritt, some of unfamiliar agents, some coded maps drawn in a hand Lucas recognized as Merritt's. Wrapped in a bloody bandage was a second USB drive, this one newer, sealed tight in a plastic bag. Lucas's pulse raced. It was a time capsule, a record of secrets someone wanted to erase. He flipped through the maps, squinting under his flashlight, then paused. Under ultraviolet light from his phone, hidden lines appeared, crisscrossing the county, each marked with a number and a word. Night Vault. He took photos of everything, heart thundering in his chest. The maps pointed to hidden drop sites, places that had been off-limits for years, forgotten by most but clearly not abandoned. Every clue tightened the web around Operation Night Vault, the mission that had ended Merritt's career and nearly cost Lucas his own. Thor pawed at a corner of the satchel, whining low. Lucas reached in and found a small, crumpled piece of paper, a list of call signs and names, including his own. His blood ran cold. Someone had kept tabs on all of them, even after the operation was supposedly shut down. As Lucas finished photographing the evidence, he felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He was standing in the middle of a story that was still alive and dangerous. Thor nudged the transmitter again, as if insisting Lucas not leave it behind. The dog's gaze was intense, fixed on Lucas with a strange urgency. Lucas wrapped the transmitter in a spare jacket and tucked it under his arm. The hike back to the cabin was tense and silent. The sun had dropped behind the ridgeline, throwing the forest into blue twilight. Thor stayed close, constantly glancing back, as if checking for pursuers. Lucas felt the weight of the satchel digging into his shoulder, the kind of evidence that could burn down a man's life, or save it. Inside the cabin, Lucas dumped the satchel and transmitter on the table and called Sarah. Her reaction was immediate. A sharp gasp followed by a rush of instructions. You have to decrypt that USB immediately, and Lucas, get those maps scanned and sent. Someone is still monitoring these sites. If Night Vault is active, you're all in danger. Lucas worked quickly, scanning and encrypting every document, uploading copies to Sarah's secure server. All the while Thor prowled the cabin, unable to settle, ears twitching at every sound outside. Lucas could feel the tension in the dog, the way he bristled every time the wind rattled the windows. The night pressed in, cold and heavy. Lucas sat at the table, piecing together the fragments, Merritt's hidden message, the coded maps, the transmitter's signal. Thor lay at his feet, his body pressed tight against Lucas's boots, unwilling to let his new partner out of reach. Lucas realized with a jolt that the case had never gone cold. It was alive, pulsing with danger, and now it was up to him and Thor to finish what Merritt had started. The first step had been taken. The hunt had begun, and there was no turning back. Outside, the forest stood watch, silent and menacing. Inside, two survivors prepared for the storm that was still to come, their destinies entwined in a web of secrets, betrayal, and the hope of justice at last. Back at the cabin, dusk crept over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of bruised purple and gray. Lucas moved with careful purpose, every motion tinged with the weight of everything he'd just uncovered. The satchel, the bloody bandage, the coded maps, each was a piece of a puzzle that someone wanted to keep buried. He set the transmitter on the table, glancing at Thor, who had resumed his post by the window, muscles tense, gaze fixed on the darkness just beyond the glass. Lucas grabbed a bottle of hydrogen peroxide and knelt by Thor, gently cleaning the worst of the dog's wounds. Thor didn't flinch. He simply pressed his nose against Lucas's hand, a silent, wordless gesture of trust. Lucas felt a pang deep inside, the ache of carrying someone else's scars as your own. It was a feeling he knew too well. He plugged the new USB into his encrypted laptop. The drive demanded a level of security clearance Lucas hadn't seen since his days working undercover. He patched Sarah Lynn in through an encrypted call, sharing his screen. Sarah's voice came through tight and focused, her fingers moving across the keyboard on her end as she worked her own digital magic. "There's a hidden file structure," she said, excitement and dread coiling together in her tone. "Encrypted videos, redacted emails, field reports, and... Wait, Lucas, there's a log here about police sabotage. Names, dates, and look at this." Caldwell. Lucas's jaw tightened. He scrolled through the evidence. Internal emails detailed how Captain Trent Caldwell had orchestrated a campaign to destroy Merritt's reputation, manipulating evidence and ordering surveillance on anyone who questioned the official story. There was even a log of threats made to Lucas himself, warnings to back off or risk losing everything. As the files decrypted, another revelation hit. Caldwell hadn't acted alone. The logs mentioned a network of officers, some still active in the state police, others with federal connections. This wasn't just about covering up a single crime. It was about erasing anyone who refused to play along. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Thor's body went rigid, his eyes following movement in the darkness beyond the tree line. Lucas stood and crossed to the window. In the fading light, he caught a glint of metal near his SUV, a tiny black disc stuck to the undercarriage. He felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. A military-grade tracker. Lucas's mind raced. The tracker meant his every move was being monitored. If Caldwell's people were this close, the clock was ticking. He snapped photos of the device, yanked it free, and wrapped it in foil. He returned to his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he documented everything, every file, every anomaly, every new threat. "Sarah, I'm emailing my son Ethan," he said quietly. "If anything happens, he needs to know everything." Sarah hesitated. "Lucas, this is bigger than both of us. They'll come for you, and for Thor, if you push any further." "Are you sure you want to drag Ethan into this?" Lucas thought of his son, now a state officer, and the years of distance between them. Pride and pain in equal measure. He made his decision. He deserves to know the truth. So did Merritt. "I won't run." He drafted the email, attaching every shred of evidence he had, and encrypted it with Sarah's latest protocols. He sent it, heart pounding, then backed up all files to a remote drive hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Thunder rumbled in the distance, strange for winter, but Lucas had long since stopped believing in coincidences. He armed himself, checking the doors and windows twice. Thor moved with him, shadowing his every step, alert to every sound. For the first time in years, Lucas felt like part of a team again, a team forged by necessity, pain, and the unspoken bond of survivors. Night settled in, thick and heavy. The only light was the flicker of the fire and the soft glow of the laptop. Sarah broke the silence, her voice softer now. "There's one more file here, Lucas. A video locked behind biometric encryption. It looks like it needs Thor's badge." Lucas took the battered K9 badge from the leather pouch and held it up to his camera. The system blinked, then unlocked the file. The screen flickered to life, and Merritt's face appeared, older, more haunted than Lucas remembered. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it," Merritt said, his voice a ghost in the room. "But if you found Thor, you're not alone. He's the last witness to what happened. Trust him. He'll lead you to the truth. They can't erase him." Lucas felt tears prick his eyes, his throat tightening. He looked at Thor, who watched the screen, ears cocked as if recognizing his old handler's voice. Sarah whispered, "Lucas, this is it. Thor is the key. And Caldwell, he's still hunting both of you." A surge of determination hardened in Lucas's chest. He wasn't just defending himself now. He was carrying on for Merritt, for Thor, for everyone who'd been crushed by the system. He documented the badge scan, the video, and every trace of digital evidence. He sent Sarah a final message. "If you don't hear from me by dawn, release everything, all of it." Outside, the wind howled and shadows gathered at the edges of the woods. Inside, Lucas and Thor waited, each carrying the weight of memory and the hope of justice. The battle lines had been drawn, not just in data, but in blood, trust, and the refusal to surrender to the darkness. Thor lay by the window unblinking, watching the night with a soldier's patience. Lucas, for the first time in a long while, felt the old fire stir inside, a promise to fight, not just for the fallen, but for those still left to save. The storm hadn't passed, it had just found its mark. And this time, Lucas and Thor would not be silent. The night deepened, pressing in on the cabin with a sense of inevitability, like fate itself was tightening its grip around Lucas and Thor. Lucas stood by the window, scanning the trees for movement, his rifle cradled in his arms. Every nerve in his body felt raw, every sound amplified by adrenaline and dread. The evidence he'd uncovered pointed to one conclusion. Captain Caldwell and his shadow network wouldn't just watch. They'd act. Lucas was certain of it. He picked up his phone and dialed Sarah, her voice crisp and controlled on the other end. "They're going to make a move, Lucas. You need to disappear, now." Lucas shook his head, glancing down at Thor, who sat at his feet, gaze unwavering. "If I run, I'll never get another chance. We need to draw them out, Sarah. And this time, I want them in the open." Sarah hesitated, then relented. "Fine. We set the bait. Leak the wrong info. Make Caldwell think you found the master files. Make him desperate." Lucas was already moving, prepping a secure message with a carefully crafted lie, that he'd decrypted everything and was ready to hand the evidence over to federal marshals. He uploaded a dummy data file to a private server and sent a message to Caldwell's known aliases, the digital equivalent of ringing the dinner bell for a pack of wolves. Afterward, Lucas moved through the cabin, rigging makeshift alarms, tripwires on doors, bells hung from old fishing line, a secondary camera stream feeding footage to Sarah's safe-house laptop. He hid the genuine evidence and encrypted drives under the hearthstone, well out of sight. Thor paced the floors with him, pausing at every window and door, as if he knew the dance of war as intimately as Lucas did. He double-checked his old revolver, loaded the shotgun, and placed his badge in a spot where he could grab it in the dark. Every movement was methodical, practiced, a ritual for a man who'd survived too many ambushes, lost too many friends to be careless. Sarah's message pinged on his phone. "Caldwell's network is spiking. Someone just accessed your property's utility grid. Power may go out. Be ready." Lucas killed all unnecessary lights, leaving only the fire to cast flickering shadows across the walls. He sat with Thor on the living room rug, waiting. The hours dragged by, each tick of the clock sharpening Lucas's senses. He could feel the pressure mounting, the line between predator and prey vanishing. Around 2 a.m. the world outside changed. The wind stopped. The silence was absolute. Then, a faint crunch of boots in the snow, slow and purposeful. The front porch creaked under the weight of a man's step. Lucas's heart hammered. He motioned Thor into the shadows, gun drawn, breath held. The lock picked. A whisper of cold air slid in as the door cracked. A masked figure slipped inside, weapon raised, movements precise, military. Lucas let the intruder get halfway across the living room before striking. Thor lunged from the darkness, hitting the man full force and knocking his gun aside. Lucas moved in, handcuffing the intruder with practiced efficiency, pressing a knee into the man's back as he frisked him. The man spat curses, his face twisted with fear and rage. "Who sent you?" Lucas demanded. The man didn't answer until Lucas held up his phone, showing the video files, the badge, and the transmitter. "I have everything. Caldwell's finished. Talk, or you go down with him." The intruder's resolve cracked. "You don't know what you're messing with. Caldwell's bigger than you think. He'll burn the whole town to keep this buried." Lucas's jaw clenched. He nodded to Thor, who growled low, teeth flashing. The message was clear. From the man's gear, Lucas found a phone. On it, a final video file marked with Merritt's name. Lucas plugged it into his laptop, heart pounding. The video flickered to life. Merritt's face appeared bruised but determined. "If you're seeing this, Caldwell's made his move. He'll try to erase me and Thor. But you can finish this, Lucas. The master drive is still out there. Follow the codes. Protect the witness. Don't let them win." Lucas looked at Thor, who stood tall despite his wounds, eyes shining with something almost human, loyalty, purpose, hope. He turned to the intruder, voice like steel. "Tell Caldwell this isn't over. The truth is coming out. And if you ever touch this dog, you'll answer to me." Sarah's voice buzzed in on the encrypted line. "Lucas, that breach triggered a location trace. Caldwell's crew is on the move, but so are the marshals. I pulled strings. They'll be here within the hour. Hold out." Lucas nodded, adrenaline flooding his system. He trussed the intruder, secured him in the locked bathroom, and returned to the living room with Thor. For a moment, the exhaustion threatened to break him, But then he saw Thor, standing guard, silent, unbroken, a living witness to everything that had been done and everything still at stake. Lucas wrote a final message to Ethan, this time not as a warning, but as a promise. Son, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I need you to trust me now. The truth is dangerous, but it's all we have left. I love you, Dad. He sat in the darkness, hand resting on Thor's back. Outside, headlights flickered on the far edge of the property. First a threat, then the hope of backup. Lucas steadied his breath, heart pounding, ready for whatever came through the night. The trap was set. The circle that had closed around Merritt, that had haunted Lucas and Thor for years, was about to be broken. In the silence, with the storm outside and the warmth of the fire beside him, Lucas felt, just for a moment, a sliver of hope. Tomorrow, they would take the fight to the enemy. Tonight they had survived, and that, for now, was enough. Daylight crept into the mountains, pale and uncertain, as if afraid to reveal the scars of the night before. The world outside Lucas Reed's cabin was motionless, each snowdrift hiding the echoes of a battle survived. Lucas hadn't slept, but there was no time for fatigue. The masked intruder, now zip-tied and stripped of his weapon, lay groaning on the kitchen floor, guarded by Thor's watchful stare. In the cold dawn, the sense of dread had been replaced by the grim determination of a man who'd survived one war and was now willing to start another. The first call came from Sarah. They're scattering. Caldwell's men are scrubbing their digital footprints. Some are fleeing, but Caldwell isn't running. Not yet. We need the master drive before he finds it. Lucas's jaw tightened. He'll try to move it or destroy it if he's desperate. But he doesn't know what we know. Sarah had already traced the last known location from the clues on the coded maps, coordinates that pointed to a derelict mountain motel at the edge of the county, a place used by undercover agents in the early days of Operation Night Vault. Lucas pulled on his parka and tactical vest, checked his sidearm, and called in every favor he had left. By noon, two trusted federal marshals, O'Hara and Ruiz, met Lucas and Sarah at the edge of the woods, their faces hard with resolve. The group drove together in a battered SUV, Thor in the back seat, pacing anxiously as they bounced over rutted roads. Sarah scrolled through her laptop, eyes darting across a web of surveillance feeds, her mouth a tight line of worry. Caldwell's men will be watching the approaches. No cell signals, no backup. Once we're inside, we're on our own, she warned. The motel appeared around a curve, crumbling and overgrown, its neon sign long dead. Shutters hung askew, paint peeled in sheets from the siding. It looked abandoned, but Lucas saw signs. A thin wisp of smoke from a rear window, footprints in the snow, the faint glint of a surveillance lens peeking from under the eaves. They went in slow, weapons drawn. The interior was a time capsule of secrets. Faded photographs tacked to walls, scattered case files, graffiti scrawled in code by agents now lost to memory. Every surface hummed with the tension of a place where history had gone wrong. Lucas and Sarah moved to the office, searching for the master drive. O'Hara and Ruiz swept the back rooms, while Thor sniffed every corridor, hackles up. In the manager's office, Lucas found a loose panel behind a filing cabinet. He pried it open, dust and darkness, and then the cold metallic gleam of a sealed hard drive. Taped to the top was a photo, Merritt and Thor side by side, a final message scrawled on the back. This is the proof. Don't let them bury us. Thor whined softly, pawing at the wall, his eyes never leaving the drive. Lucas felt the weight of it, the culmination of every risk, every loss, but the danger wasn't over. Suddenly, Thor froze, nose twitching. He bolted down the hall, barking furiously. Lucas followed, heart pounding as they rounded the corner to see O'Hara and Ruiz backing out of a guest room, their faces white. It's rigged, O'Hara hissed. There's a tripwire. Caldwell set a bomb. Get back! The team dove for cover just as the explosion tore through the room, sending shards of plaster and flame into the corridor. The blast echoed through the empty halls, a violent warning that Caldwell would kill anyone to keep his secrets. Lucas scrambled to his feet, hearing Sarah's shout, "We have to move!" The building groaned, timbers smoking, but they couldn't leave the drive behind. With Thor leading, they dashed through a back exit, dodging collapsing beams and choking smoke. The snow outside hissed as it met the heat of the blast. They regrouped at the edge of the woods, adrenaline surging, the master drive clutched in Lucas's gloved hands. Thor, panting and shaken, pressed close to Lucas, never once breaking eye contact. In that moment, Lucas realized that Thor had saved them again. Sarah plugged the drive into her secure laptop, decrypting it in real time. Pages of files unspooled before them, audio, video, signed statements, surveillance logs. The evidence was overwhelming. Caldwell had orchestrated Merritt's murder, planted false evidence, and labeled him a traitor to cover the tracks of an illegal surveillance operation. Thor, listed as missing, neutralize on sight, was the last piece Caldwell had never managed to erase. Ruiz cursed softly, shaking his head. "We have to get this to the Justice Department, now." Lucas nodded grimly. "He'll try to stop us. But he's running out of shadows." As they prepared to move, Sarah looked at Lucas, her eyes shining with hope and fear. "We have what we need, but the only way to finish this is to face Caldwell out in the open." Lucas turned to Thor, ruffling the shepherd's battered fur. "We do this together, boy. One more time." In the distance, the first flakes of a new storm began to fall, swirling around them like a warning and a promise. The chase wasn't over, but now, for the first time, Lucas felt the tide turning. They weren't running anymore. They were hunting. And for the first time, Caldwell had nowhere left to hide. Snow fell harder now, the sky closing in with a relentless urgency that seemed to echo the tension inside Lucas and his battered crew. Lucas gripped the master hard drive as if it were a lifeline. The evidence was finally in their hands, but Caldwell, desperate and cornered, would do anything to escape. The phone in Lucas's pocket buzzed. It was Ethan, his son. "Dad, Caldwell's heading to North Hollow Airstrip, private jet. His men are already there." Lucas's heart thudded. "We're on our way. Ethan, be careful. If you see him, don't engage alone." "Copy. Just get here fast." Sarah, shivering beside him, worked her phone with numb fingers. "I've pinged the Justice Department. They'll have agents inbound, but we're the closest. We need to keep Caldwell from getting off the ground." O'Hara drove, Ruiz riding shotgun, Lucas and Sarah crammed in the back seat with Thor curled between them. The SUV fishtailed through the blizzard, headlights slashing through the swirling white. Every bump, every shadow, felt like the edge of a trap. Thor pressed against Lucas, his warmth grounding, eyes locked on the road ahead. The North Hollow Airstrip was little more than a cleared patch of frozen ground, flanked by abandoned hangars and a single windsock snapping in the gale. Caldwell's jet, a sleek Gulfstream, waited on the runway, engines whining, cargo doors yawning open. Silhouettes moved in the swirling snow. Caldwell's men shoving duffel bags onto the plane, scanning the darkness with flashlights and assault rifles. They parked well back, headlights off. The marshals fanned out, weapons drawn, slipping behind snow-laden fuel trucks in the shell of an old crop duster. Sarah handed Lucas a thumb drive with the critical files, her eyes fierce. "If you get separated, upload it. Whatever happens." Lucas nodded, heart pounding. "Let's move." A sharp crack of gunfire split the air. Ruiz shouted a warning as a bullet pinged off the SUV's hood. Chaos erupted. Caldwell's men opened fire, sweeping the airstrip with wild, panicked shots. O'Hara and Ruiz returned fire, pinning two of the guards behind the landing gear. Lucas ducked, dragging Sarah and Thor behind a stack of crates. "Dad!" Ethan's voice over the radio, strained but determined. "I'm on the south fence, coming in." Lucas's world shrank to flashes of movement, shouts, the icy sting of snow on his face. Then an opening. Caldwell, gray-haired and furious, sprinted across the tarmac toward the jet, flanked by two bodyguards. He held a pistol and a cell phone, barking frantic orders. Thor's body went rigid. The shepherd broke from cover, dodging between crates and barrels, moving with astonishing speed despite his wounds. Lucas watched, helpless and terrified, as Thor barreled straight toward Caldwell. Caldwell saw the dog too late. Thor lunged, hitting Caldwell square in the chest, knocking him sprawling into the snow. The pistol skittered away. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. The sight of a battered K9 pinning down a notorious corrupt official, more powerful than any command. Lucas seized the moment. Sprinting forward, he tackled one of the bodyguards, disarming him with a swift, practiced move. Sarah, covering him, shouted, "Get the files online now!" Lucas dropped behind the cover of a landing wheel and jammed the thumb drive into his phone. He navigated the government portal Sarah had set up, fingers numb, breath misting the frozen air. Behind him, the firefight raged. O'Hara took a bullet in the vest but stayed on his feet. Ethan wrestled another of Caldwell's men to the ground, and Sarah fired with icy precision. The upload bar crawled, 23%, 47%, 80%. Caldwell, struggling under Thor's weight, managed to scream, "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You'll never—" But Thor clamped his jaws down. A warning, not a kill. Caldwell went silent, face pressed into the snow. The phone vibrated in Lucas's shaking hands. "Upload complete." He called out, voice breaking through the gunfire. "The evidence is live. The department has everything, audio, video, financials." "Caldwell, it's over!" Federal agents poured onto the airstrip, blue lights cutting through the white storm. Caldwell's last bodyguards dropped their weapons, surrendering to the advancing marshals. Caldwell himself was hauled to his feet, his fancy coat torn, face smeared with blood and humiliation. Ethan, panting and bruised, ran to his father's side. For a moment they just stared at each other, the past and present colliding in the chaos. Then Lucas pulled his son into a fierce, shivering hug. Sarah collapsed onto the snow, laughter and tears blending as the adrenaline faded. O'Hara grinned, wincing at his bruised ribs. Thor, finally released, limped to Lucas, pressing his head into Lucas's chest. Lucas knelt, arms around the shepherd, gratitude and relief flooding him. In the swirling snow, Lucas stood and looked at Caldwell, once untouchable, now broken, surrounded by the agents he'd thought he controlled. "You lost. And it was a dog that brought you down," Lucas said quietly. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The blizzard had swallowed up the night, but for the first time, Lucas felt a peace at the edges of exhaustion. He glanced at his team, Sarah, Ethan, the marshals, and Thor, each battered but unbroken. Together they had faced the storm and survived. And now the truth was out, unleashed like a force of nature no one could ever bury again. Justice at last had arrived in the blizzard. Weeks passed and the world changed. It started with a headline, first local, then national, and soon international. Corrupt police ring exposed, justice delivered in snowbound showdown. Caldwell's arrest, captured on shaky footage and shared across every platform, became the symbol of a reckoning people had been waiting for. The man who had once pulled the strings behind closed doors now sat in a federal cell, his reputation and empire in ashes. Lucas Reed watched it unfold from his hospital bed, a patch of sunlight slanting across the crisp sheets. He was healing, a concussion, a few cracked ribs, nothing compared to what some had lost. Thor slept curled at his side, one paw draped protectively over Lucas's arm, the grizzled shepherd never leaving his sight. Flowers, cards, and emails poured in from strangers who'd followed the story, people who saw in Thor not just a dog, but a living testament to loyalty and resilience. The Justice Department held a public ceremony in the courthouse square. It felt surreal, standing in front of a crowd after so many years hiding in shadows. Reporters crowded the steps, flashes going off, microphones thrust forward. But for Lucas, Sarah, Ethan, and even the usually unflappable O'Hara and Ruiz, this wasn't about recognition. It was about closure, and about the people who hadn't lived to see the truth revealed. Lucas wore his old uniform, badge polished, the weight of its history both lighter and heavier than before. When his name was called, he stepped forward, Thor at his side. The applause was thunderous, but all he saw was Merritt's face in his mind, and the ghosts of all those erased by corruption. He stood at the podium, voice steady but quiet, refusing to let the story be reduced to just a headline. "I never thought I'd stand here. Not after everything that happened, not after the years spent running from the truth. But justice isn't only about punishment. It's about healing, about mending wounds that run through families, towns, and entire systems." He paused, glancing down at Thor, who sat at attention, gray-muzzled and proud. "This dog crossed a mountain in the dead of winter to bring us the truth. He didn't do it out of anger or vengeance, but out of loyalty. Loyalty that outlasts betrayal. Loyalty that endures, even after death. There are good men and women in every department, in every walk of life. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to bear witness, to speak when you're afraid. His eyes found Ethan in the front row. His son's face was open in a way Lucas hadn't seen since childhood, proud, emotional, the distance between them closing with every word. I dedicate this to my wife, to James Merritt, and to everyone who ever carried the burden of silence. May we never forget what happens when we choose to look away. May we honor those who carried the truth for us. As he finished, the crowd stood in a spontaneous ovation. Thor barked once, deep and resonant, as if sealing the promise. Sarah accepted her award with tears in her eyes, her brother's memory heavy on her shoulders. The marshals received commendations, their names finally cleared after years of suspicion and slander. And Thor, no longer a shadow asset, received a custom medal, a collar engraved with his service and sacrifice. News anchors called him a hero. Children lined up to pet him, some crying into his fur. But the real healing began not with medals or ceremonies, but with small, quiet moments. That night, Lucas and Ethan sat on the porch, looking out over the newly thawed hills. The air was soft with the promise of spring, the last patches of snow melting into the grass. For a long while, they said nothing. Then Ethan spoke, voice rough but sure. "I'm sorry, Dad, for not believing you, for staying away. I didn't want to lose you too." Lucas put a hand on his son's shoulder. "We both lost a lot, but we're here, and we're not running anymore." They watched as Thor chased the wind across the yard, barking at shadows and sunbeams alike. The years of estrangement, the guilt, the anger, the unsaid apologies faded into something softer, not forgotten but accepted. Wounds could become scars. Scars could become strength. Later, as dusk settled, Lucas wandered to Merritt's grave, a simple stone under a spreading oak. He placed the badge and a photo of Thor and Merritt together on the marker. "You kept your promise," Lucas whispered. "We did too." Back in town, life moved on. The story faded from the news, replaced by newer tragedies and triumphs. But for the people who lived it, the lessons lingered. Neighbors who'd once eyed each other with suspicion now nodded in solidarity. Officers who'd kept their heads down spoke out against corruption, inspired by the quiet bravery of a dog who refused to be erased. Sarah opened a pro bono cyber investigation office, determined to keep the powerful honest. O'Hara and Ruiz returned to the marshal's service, this time with reputations restored and a sense of pride. Ethan and Lucas started working together, not just as family, but as partners, helping rebuild the trust their department had lost. And Thor, old, graying, but still sharp-eyed, became a fixture at community events, teaching children about courage and loyalty, allowing his story to give hope to those who needed it most. Justice, Lucas learned, wasn't a finish line. It was a process, a series of choices to heal, to remember, to refuse to let the past define the future. Loyalty, too, wasn't just the province of dogs or heroes. It was something every person had to choose, day by day, in moments both grand and painfully small. And for the first time in years, as Lucas drifted to sleep with Thor curled at his feet and the promise of a new day on the horizon, he believed that healing was not only possible, but already underway. Spring in North Hollow was always slow to arrive. Snow lingered along the fence posts, and the wind still carried the sharp bite of winter, but hope, finally, was everywhere. The headlines had faded, but what mattered most was growing quietly behind Lucas Reed's cabin. A new beginning, rooted in the past, watered by memory and forgiveness. Lucas stood in the field that he and Ethan had cleared together, watching as volunteers, neighbors, friends, and old colleagues pounded fence stakes and stretched wire. At the far end of the pasture, a new wooden sign read, "Merritt Field, K9 Training Healing Center." The letters were hand-carved, the wood polished and shining in the late afternoon sun. It was more than just a place for dogs to run or train. It was a place where broken things could mend and where second chances were not just possible, but celebrated. Thor ambled through the grass, muzzle silvered with age, scars visible but softened by time. He was the unofficial mayor of Merritt Field. Every child, every stray, every veteran who arrived here seeking purpose seemed to find strength in his presence. The old shepherd had become both legend and guardian, and the routines of the center revolved around his steady heartbeat. Lucas often joked that he and Thor were both too stubborn to quit, but the truth was deeper. Both had chosen, again and again, not to let loss define them. Today was the center's grand opening. Sarah stood by the gates, laughing as she signed in families and handed out maps of the new facilities. The cyber investigator had traded the world of shadows for something brighter, teaching classes on digital safety and sharing her story with anyone who needed to believe that justice could prevail. O'Hara and Ruiz had driven in from the city, proudly wearing their marshal's badges and helping lead dog-handling workshops for teens at risk. Even the sheriff's department sent representatives, a gesture of goodwill that would have seemed impossible just months before. Lucas watched it all, a sense of peace blooming inside him. There was still grief, there always would be, but it no longer poisoned his days. Instead, it had become something he could hold, examine, and even honor. He caught sight of Ethan working with a group of young handlers, demonstrating leash techniques while Thor supervised with his usual stoic approval. After the morning session, Lucas called everyone together in the field. He cleared his throat, hands tucked awkwardly in his jeans pockets, and glanced at the faces gathered before him. I used to think healing was about forgetting pain, erasing scars. But I was wrong. Healing is about honoring the truth, about facing the things that broke us, and choosing to keep living and to keep loving anyway. He gestured to the sign, the buildings, the community around him. This place is for everyone who ever thought they were alone. It's for dogs who lost their handlers, for people who lost their way, for families who thought the darkness would never lift. If Thor has taught me anything, it's that loyalty isn't a word, it's an act. It's 1,000 small choices to stand by someone, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. A ripple of applause moved through the crowd. Sarah wiped her eyes, and Ethan put an arm around his father's shoulders. As the day wore on, laughter and shouts filled the yard. Children ran relay races with the center's new K-9 recruits, and veterans practiced search and rescue drills. Volunteers planted trees in memory of those lost to injustice, each sapling a promise that the past would never be buried, but would instead nurture something better. Thor, though slower now, made his rounds with dignified patience. He stopped to let a frightened child bury their face in his fur, then led a pack of younger dogs through an agility course, barking out instructions as if he still wore a badge. The scars along his side told their own story, but in this place, they were marks of survival, not defeat. As twilight deepened, Lucas found himself sitting on the porch, the golden glow of the center stretching out before him. Ethan joined him, 2 mugs of strong coffee warming their hands against the evening chill. "You ever think we'd get here?" Ethan asked quietly, his gaze distant but soft. Lucas shook his head, smiling. "Never. Not after all that happened. But maybe that's the point. Maybe none of us get here alone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last families drift away, the volunteers stacking chairs and turning off lights. The first stars blinked out above the treetops. Thor settled at Lucas's feet, sighing contentedly. Lucas thought of Merritt, of his wife, of all the people lost along the way. He hoped they could see this, see that their sacrifices hadn't been in vain, that even the coldest winter could break, given time and courage. He knelt beside Thor, scratching the shepherd's gray muzzle, voice low but sure. "We made it, old friend. Not because we ran from the pain, but because we carried it, and we used it to make something good." Thor looked up, eyes shining with pride and trust. In that gaze, Lucas saw the whole journey, the storms, the betrayals, the lonely vigils, the victories, both small and profound. He rose, walking with Ethan out to the sign at the gate. They hung a wreath of wildflowers, one for each name, each story, each life that had touched theirs and changed them. As they walked back, Lucas felt lighter than he had in years. He realized that true belonging wasn't about erasing what had happened, but about choosing every day to build something new from what remained. That's what Thor had taught him, the power of silent witness, the courage of second chances, the healing that comes not from running from pain, but from honoring it. In the fading light, as the center settled into quiet and the hills glowed with the promise of another spring, Lucas looked out over Merritt Field and knew, finally, that the circle was complete. Thor lay in the grass, at peace, surrounded by friends and family, Safe at last and honored. Lucas stood with his arm around his son, both of them smiling, both knowing that tomorrow would come. And this time, they would be ready. Loyalty is an act, not a word. The courage to bear witness, even in silence, can change the course of history. Second chances are possible, for people, for animals, and for towns scarred by loss. Healing begins the moment we stop running from pain and start honoring those who carried truth for us. The silent messenger had given them all a future. And now, as dusk closed gently around Merritt Field, Lucas knew that legacy would never fade.